you perfect. Sounds
okay.
Good. Great.
All we need. Am I supposed to do the name game too, or not?
We can do that in the after party. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Let's get some of our initial intro type questions out of the way.
Oh, okay.
Because
Sure.
I am thrilled to talk to you. I'm a long time reader, but for those that are to you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first got into writing?
I am a longtime writer. My first book was published a lot of years ago, in the early 80s. Okay. And I got into writing because I read a book, Kathleen Woodiwiss, historical romance, Shanna, was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And it was given to me by a gal who was Miss Perfect at our church. And she kept asking me, have you read that book yet? Have you?
Uh-oh. We lost you, lost the sound.
Uh-oh. Do I
there
need
you
to
are.
do something?
Okay, now you're back again.
I'm back. Oh, okay. I'll try to limit my movements. Anyway, so, Bonnie, my friend, gave me Shanna by Kathleen Woodiwiss, and I ended up in desperation for something to do. I had a 5-year-old who had a broken foot, and he was making me absolutely nuts, just constant, always wanting to do something or to have attention. So I sat down and read the book, and by the time I finished it, I went right back to the beginning and started to read it again, because I just did not want to leave that world. I just did not want to leave those characters. And it started me thinking. And of course, I came up with ideas for books in my head. And so I started to write them down, because I thought romance was sort of accessible, but it touched things that were really important to me. Love and connection and just a whole bunch of things like that. So my feeling was that even if I just did it for myself, it would be really nice to have finished something, because I started writing when I was in junior high school, and the stories I wrote sounded like they were in junior high school. And I would get kind of fed up with them, and I'd just stop. But you get to a phase in your life, I think, where you really realize if you're really grown up, you need to finish the things that you start.
Sure.
Or make them, or come up with a good reason that it's not worth finishing. And so I started this book, and my husband, Don, who was teaching at a small university in Oklahoma, really encouraged me to do it. He just thought it was wonderful. And I'd talk to him about the characters and everything. He sort of lived it with me. And let's see. And I think probably the things that are important to know about me are that I was a widow. I mean, I guess I am still a widow, even though I'm in another relationship now and have been for quite a few years. I lost my husband, Don, when he was 47 and I was 45. And I have 2 sons. And a year ago, I lost one of my sons. And it was traumatic for me. But interestingly, I just have a real feeling that he not only still exists, that his mind and his spirit and so forth are still very present in my life. And I feel that way about my ex-husband too, or no, my former husband, my late husband. Oh, well, anyway, Don. And so I just feel like love has been something that I have studied, I have learned about, I have tried to perfect in my life, although do you ever really get to perfect it? But it's something that really is important to me. And that's one of the reasons I started to write romance in the first place. And that has continued to this day with my second love, Rex. And he's quite the character. And we get along very well. And I am very happy to have found love a second time. And I think probably writing romance is, at various times I've thought, well, maybe I ought to be writing something else. Because mostly I loved history, always loved history. So it was natural for me to gravitate to historical romance. And there are various times that I thought, I would really like to write something contemporary. And actually, I have done that a few times. But that's not something that most people know about me. I mean, I'm pretty much categorized with historical romance, and that's okay with me. But I think at this stage in my life, I'm going to stretch out and try to do something a little different. And it will be a contemporary. But
Oh, wow.
it will, yeah, I am working on it right now. But it's also got a major potential romance in it. And I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go. But anyway, so I'm kind of working that way. But you never know what will happen. So,
well, and I appreciate all your comments about your past loves, both with your former husband and your sons and your current relationship, and how all of that does tie into the desire to write romance, because there's,
yes,
unfortunately, I mean, there's still a lot of times where it's the pushback of, oh, it's romance, and different opinions on that. And we've talked about it a lot in our book clubs. Especially with everything that's been going on in the world over the last couple of years. I know for me, the romances are a comfort, and
oh yes,
the ups and downs, and irrespective of even what type of trope or genre within romance you're reading,
right,
we're guaranteed that happily ever after, and again, that appreciation of love and relationships.
yes.
And it's always been present throughout all of your books.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want. That's important to me, and the other thing is that I started early on in the 80s. I thought, I didn't know anything about writing. I just wrote. And I did, somebody said something about your voice. And I was like, voice, what's that? I don't have a clue what that is. And then I realized long about the fourth book that I wrote, that I really did have a voice, and I understood what it meant. And because for recreational reading for myself, I would read Regency romances. And a lot of them, the Georgette Heyer and so forth, a lot of them had the comedy of manners in them. And I loved those. I just adored them. And so in my fourth book, I just somehow thought, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And I ended up writing a story that had some characters that were kind of wacky and some, plot points that were really a little odd. And I chuckled when I was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
So the important thing then was for me to sort of tell my stories in my way, with hopefully making people chuckle and laugh and sigh a little bit and maybe get a little warm under the collar and, all of that. It was all important to me at that time. And at various times in my career, I've had other various things would become important to me to try to share or to try to, and parts of my life have woven into my stories. Being an older woman who is looking for love, or somebody who has lost a love because they simply made life choices that were not compatible with the relationship. And suddenly the person, there is a re-meeting, and at a different place in your life, suddenly things click that wouldn't have before. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of interesting things that have happened, with regard to, sort of the tone and the flow of my career. Let's put it like that.
I know I've definitely been on the lookout more for exactly those types of characters that have gone through life, who are perhaps a little bit older than the fresh ingenue. And how does that then get incorporated into the stories? And I know through so many of your books, especially with a lot of the characters, they have been maybe outside of the norm, or
Yeah.
everything from the courtesans, the pirates, the various businessmen, railroads, into the characters now, where with Nora being a tutor and as opposed to a governess, right? She's supposed to be
a tutor,
the young heir. And then also with Barclay, where he's not the traditional nobleman, right? And so how important is that when you're crafting the stories that you have these unusual characters? I mean, does that aspect come to you early, or does it just kind of develop while you're writing?
Well, the secondary characters usually come as I'm writing, but the primary characters, that's where all of my books start, with a character that seems like they have a lot of complexity and a lot of stuff in their background. Maybe some of it wasn't so pleasant, like Barclay's background. He had a grandfather who, ramrodded his life and considered him sort of a not really nobleman material. And I understand, how that would happen in the Victorian era in England. But he particularly was a character in the previous book, Hero Wanted. And he was such a good guy, and surprisingly competent in a lot of things. He could fire guns, he was quite a marksman. He was big and brawny and burly, and not burly, more brawny. And he had an interesting relationship with this perfect gentleman, who was the hero of the first book, and didn't understand why the heroine didn't just immediately fall at his feet, because he was so perfect. And for him to be best friends with this big, burly, strong, kind of not the most socially adept guy, that was kind of important to me. And I like the idea of finding somebody that would just set his heart on fire, somebody who would really love him and care about him, yet also kind of take him to task for some of the things that the way he could be kind of growly and difficult at times. And also you wouldn't expect that he would really take to children at all. Ugh, no. And get stuck with his 6-year-old ward, who is the little Earl of all things. He got the title instead of Barclay. So, but I think you start with those main characters and then find people who complement them. And I started with Barclay for this book. And he was very strong. He is a protector. You were talking about who would rescue you. Well, heck, if I knew a Barclay, I'd choose him. He is a protector, and that's what he's been raised to be. And so putting him in charge when his grandfather dies, and he's put in charge of the little Earl, the one who has actually inherited the title, he is determined, even though he really doesn't want to do it. He's determined he's going to do it right, and he will protect the kid. And he does over and over protect the kid, even though the kid's really a little beyond the pale. But also he protects the heroine from the minute they meet. He's trying to protect her, and she doesn't always want to be protected. Sometimes she just wants to be left alone. But she needs to be really strong too, and she is, and educated, and not one to put up with a whole lot of stuff out of men. In fact, she's lost 3 jobs because of different things, but one of them because her boss, and in those days, if your boss came on to you, then if you wanted to keep your job, you oftentimes submitted. And that was, this is in the Victorian era, and there weren't many places for women in the workplace. So she had had kind of a rough time. And I think the two of them together make for really good sparks flying.
How much research goes into each of your books? Because I have to admit, when looking at the synopsis of this and that it opens up at a free love symposium, like,
yeah.
Okay, which direction is she going with this? And it turned out to be completely different than where my mind was going. But with that and the comments and then just the different elements, I mean, that's always a big part of your books. How much research are you doing to put those factual bits into the story?
With each book, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
For the last 15 years, makes me sound really old. For the last 15 years, I've written pretty much exclusively in the Victorian era. And for a long time, I ignored the Victorian era because I thought of Victorians as being very laced up and very stuffy and not pleasant people to be around. And that was a prejudice of mine, And when my sister Sharon was working on a master's thesis at one point, and she was going through reading a lot of ladies' journals and newspapers and things like that from the Victorian era, because she was writing about that era. And I was stunned when she shared with me some of the things that were today we would just be horrified to see in the personals ad. There would be basically pity cases. Recently widowed with 3 poor, starving little children, looking for a husband, looking for someone to take us in. And it was kind of like, oh my gosh, really? And all kinds of things. And also, I didn't realize that there was in Victorian England, in the later part of Victorian England, because so many men were leaving the UK in Britain to go abroad and extend the empire, whether it was with the military or with what had been the East India Company and all of the other financial things that they were doing all over the world. There were very few men at home of marriageable age. A lot of them shipped out or joined the army or, went to sell things or to make their fortunes in the US or in, India or wherever, Ceylon. And it was interesting because the women were really indoctrinated that they needed to marry and stay at home and have children and so forth. Well, what do you do when there are no men that you could potentially marry? I was really stunned to read about that and to think about it. And so one of the books that I started, the first book that was a Victorian era book, was, and frankly, there were a lot of upper class men that did not want to marry because whatever their salary was going to suddenly have to provide for a wife and then children beyond that, and education and schooling for the kids and all of that stuff. And their pastimes they would no longer be able to afford, like drinking and gambling and horse racing and wrestling and all of the other things that men thought were, especially well-to-do men thought were acceptable pastimes, or keeping a mistress. They wouldn't have a whole lot of money to do any of that. So a lot of men in the upper classes just didn't care to get married, at least not until it was really necessary to have an heir or something. And so it was interesting. So the first book that I wrote in the Victorian era was The Last Bachelor. And The Last Bachelor was about a scheming widow. So, and tackled some of those things. And since then, I've written pretty much all of my historicals have been in the Victorian era, and they have sometimes had different locations and different, but a lot of them had the Victorian sensibility. And in doing the research, I developed a whole new view of the Victorian, both in the US and in the Victorian era in the UK. A real respect, because everything we are as a culture now came out of the Victorian England and Victorian America. Everything from ecology and taking care of the environment and social responsibility and taking care of the poor and women's suffrage, just a whole bunch of things that started to happen in large part because of the Industrial Revolution. But
wow.
Anyway, really interesting stuff, I thought.
I always impress my history teachers with all the little bits of information that I know I picked up from historical romances. So
yeah. I think, and I was fascinated at first with historical romance because of all of those,
that
interesting facts and things. Yeah.
It's one of the fun aspects. In addition to all the romance, it's those little nuggets. It's like, God, this is great.
Yeah.
Well, Betina, I want to make sure that we get to ask you some of our fresh fact questions. These are quick questions, kind of what comes to the top of your head on a lot of different subjects. Okay. Not meant to be hard.
Okay.
Although some people are like, ooh, what's your favorite writing fuel?
Fuel.
Like coffee, chocolate, popcorn, something to get you through those hard stints of writing.
I hate to be so cliche, but really chocolate is that's kind of it. And I have a real thing about pretzels. I love pretzels.
Do you mix them, or is it like only one versus the other?
I can. Yeah. But I'd have to say chocolate is the biggest thing, but I have to be really careful about that because, blood sugar, you get to a certain stage of life and you got to deal with the body. And so I just want to make sure I don't overdo. But, when I really want something to kind of keep me going, chocolate.
Yep. How do you celebrate a new release?
Probably with Rex and I will share some either Prosecco or champagne, depending on what we can afford and what we have a taste for. But I'll tell you, something that's really nice is hot cocoa with some Baileys in it.
Oh, yeah.
I really like that. And so for me, I just soon toast with, hot chocolate and Baileys as I would with, Moet and Chandon, or something, so yeah.
What 3 items would you have on you if you were stranded?
Can I say telephone?
Of course.
I just
pick
really
any 3 items.
Would have to stay in touch. Yeah. Telephone and I think a laptop computer. Of course, if I'm stranded somewhere, if I'm traveling, then definitely a computer. And I'd say probably the third thing would be, if I'm stranded, I'd say it would have to be fruit. I love fruit too. And I just want something that would be sweet, but sort of nourishing too. So I think probably that.
Who was your first book boyfriend or girlfriend?
Oh, book boyfriend. Honestly, I think the very first one was probably the Beauregard guy, the Beauchamp guy, in Shayna. And it wasn't Rafe. I can't remember his first name. I remember his last name, but not his first name at this point. And he was he was so memorable, and he was strong, and he was principled, and he was, oh, very sexy. You know, he knew what he wanted, and he was going to go after Shayna. So I really, really liked him.
It made an impact. Okay.
Probably the reason I started writing romance, because I fell in love with him.
How about what luxury item or unnecessary product or service can you just absolutely not live without?
Okay, this is going to be telling, but I have a lady who comes and helps me clean the house. I
Hey,
love
no
her.
judgment.
No judgment. You know, she comes every couple of 3 weeks and, you know, just lays into it, you know, and I'm so grateful for her. So yeah.
Hey, the
that's
more you can
probably it.
outsource so you can spend time on other
Yep.
things, I'm all for that.
Yep.
Completely aligned.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What childish thing do you still do as an adult?
Childish thing. You know, that's a hard one for me. I don't know, maybe this doesn't really quite fit, but I still have a baby tooth.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, right there.
Huh.
That's a baby tooth. And I had a dentist once who said, that's a baby tooth. That's kind of a small tooth. How about if I build it up for you a little bit? I said, okay, sure. The other one just never came in. It was laying down in the roof of my mouth, and so I ended up keeping it. So here in my 7th decade, I am sporting a baby tooth. So I don't know if that kind of, I probably shouldn't have even told that. So you might want to edit that out. Anyway.
It's one of those unique and unusual facts. Don't worry.
Yes. Okay. Then it'll work. It'll work.
How about what is your favorite errand on your day off?
On my day off, one of my favorite errands. Walking my dog. Walking my dog.
Getting outside.
Of course, that I can't really. She is 14 months old. It's a golden retriever, and she's very light colored golden retriever, and she is very stubborn. But you know, over time, she's settling down, and one of these days, I think she's going to be one of those goldens that everybody talks about how wonderful golden retrievers are. She's not there yet, but I think maybe she will be. And it's gotten to the point that when we take walks, I don't mind stopping and letting her sniff everything. But it wasn't the most fun in the world when we started walking. I can tell you that. And so it was really an errand, I guess. Second to that would be going to the grocery store. I just like shopping for food.
Well, it all depends on the grocery store too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Good old.
There are definitely some you can just wander around. There's so many choices. So I can understand that.
And feel virtuous while you're doing that, because you're
Exactly.
not shopping for things that you don't need. You need the food. It's the question of what little goodies you'll find. I don't like that.
Exactly. What is that surprising purchase always, right?
Yes. And stuff that I bring home that Rex will go, what's that? And when he tastes it, it's like, oh, this is pretty good. You know? Okay.
And one of the most important questions is, where can our readers stay in touch with you and find out more about you? And what can they look forward to next?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a website, BetinaKrahn.com, and it needs to be updated. I know it does. But you can always send, a letter through that. Or you can write me at my Gmail account, which is bkrahn 007 at Gmail. And I would love to have reader feedback, and that kind of thing, I'd be happy to answer questions or, you know, do requests. I've had people send me books and to sign and stuff like that through the mail, and I'm happy to do that kind of stuff. Every once in a while I'll run a contest, but I'm just not too much into that anymore. But I will say, but I do have some extra books, and if somebody needs some to fill out a basket or whatever, I'd be happy to do that too. But
Oh, I will be contacting you for some of our fresh raffle baskets then.
okay, that sounds good.
Hey.
I can do that.
And of course, The White Knight Needed is the latest book. And
Right.
what can our readers look for next?
I'm thinking about doing Ranville's story. And he is an interesting character. He turns out to be sort of a Barclay's valet / dog's body / a little bit of everything. And it turns out he's a man with a lot of talents that you don't expect in a guy who has been basically sort of a gambler and a tailor of all things. He is a very accomplished tailor. His father had a tailor shop in the West End of London, and gradually, somehow, the business went. But he was a good tailor, and it broke his father's heart to lose the business. And Renville is really good looking, as sort of imposing and almost a little scary as Barclay is in the looks department, or at least he sort of seems that way. Ranville is really a looker, and women are always coming on to it, and he's had to learn to defend himself in a pleasant way, in a gentlemanly way. And so I think I would like to do his book, but I'm also working on a contemporary book. I've been reading a lot of science fiction. I've been reading a lot of philosophy. I've been reading because my undergrad degree and was in biology, and my husband was a physicist. My first husband was a physicist, and my younger son, the one who died, was a physicist. So I lost 2 physicists in their 40s, my husband and my son. I don't know what that's about, or what the world or the universe was trying to tell me, but and so I started reading and researching a lot of things, and it is interesting to me to learn about consciousness and how it kind of operates the universe, and that the mind is really the force behind it all. The books like The One Mind and Biocentrism and things like that are really interesting to me, both from a personal level, but also I have the contemporary that I'm working on is there's the physicist is he's quite the hunk, but he's a little out of it at times. And the heroine is a psychologist, and mostly because she's worried about herself. She's not sure she's all together, but she's good at helping other people. So, and in a university setting. So I think it'll be fun. It is fun, at least so far. So anyway, that's
Great.
what I'm working on.
Awesome. Okay, well, Betina, that wraps up our interview today. So hopefully, and we're looking forward to you sticking around for our reader Q&A after.
Okay, sure.
But this has been a thrill for me because, like I said earlier, I've been a long time reader, and I'll show you my stack of those early books during our after party. But thank you again for joining us today.
All righty. It was great to be here. Thank you, Sarah.